We look at lots of opportunities. A lot of them are terrible. 50 of them might be, okay, this could be cool. And those 50 ultimately will do about 6 deals a year.
Bonjour et bienvenue sur cette nouvelle série du podcast FuturAgri. Je suis Colline Laurent et pendant 5 épisodes, je vous emmène à la rencontre de personnalités inspirantes et inspirées qui font bouger les lignes du monde agricole et alimentaire. Aujourd'hui, j'ai le plaisir d'accueillir Mark Khan, le CEO d'Omnivore, le premier fonds d'investissement dédié à l'innovation agricole en Inde. Il est venu de Bangalore nous donner sa vision du développement international des startups AgriTech. Hi Mark.
Hey. Enchanté, nice to be here.
Thank you so much for being here. Mark, I know you've been trained as an agricultural engineer. You've worked in agri-food industry your whole career. But in the beginning, you were not planning to be an investor. And yet here you are, partner at Omnivore. As you know, some of our audience is not quite familiar with the venture capital world. So to get into the subject, could you explain to us in simple words, what is your job?
Sure. And it's worth saying, I still see myself as an agribusiness professional. I started my career with Syngenta on the agri-input side of things in seeds and agrochemicals. I then moved to India in 2007, 2008, working for a large Indian agribusiness company, mostly in animal feed and poultry. And so, like many of your listeners, I've been in commercial agribusiness, and it's kind of by mistake that I have spent the last 12 years of my life as an investor, because I didn't come from an investing background. I had never been active in startups before founding Omnivore, co-founding Omnivore with Janesh Shah. And I hopefully I can give a sense of a 101, a simple explanation of what we do in venture capital. The easiest way to think of it is we are essentially dedicated to helping new businesses get their first real funding to scale. So every venture capital firm in the world is an intermediary. We raise money from investors, right? Those investors could be banks and insurance companies. They could be rich people, what they call family offices. They could be corporations. They could be pension funds. They could be, development banks. And so we raise a pool of capital, and then we identify promising opportunities, in this case, AgriTech startups, to invest in. And we generally write the first investments, the first institutional investments with most of the startups that we work with. There's a whole lot of jargon used in the venture ecosystem, but usually the first round into a startup is very appropriately for agriculture called the seed round.
Yeah.
Okay. And a seed round is really in the range of, on the small side these days, $1 million, on the very large side, $4 million, but typically they're $2 million rounds invested in companies that are at a stage where it makes sense for them to raise institutional money, meaning the team has come together, the product is almost there or already there, they've got some sales, but maybe just a little bit. And so it makes sense for them to go to VCs, venture capital firms, and try to put together a round so that they have capital for the next, say, 2 years to scale, to advance the product, to grow, and hopefully then raise more money to scale even further. And so that's what every VC does, is we raise money from what we call LPs, limited partners. We look at lots of opportunities. I think in a given year, we might see 300 to 500 opportunities.
Oh, wow.
And I mean, a lot of them are terrible, okay? So I would say, like, if we saw 300 in a year, 250 would be not worth, looking past the first email or, a very short phone call. 50 of them might be, okay, this could be cool. And we dig in further. And those 50 ultimately will do about 6 deals a year. Okay. So it's a pretty low percentage of what we see. But yeah, we look at opportunities, we choose a few to do, and we work with those companies in their evolution, in their journey to help them succeed.
Thanks. And what is the kind of startups that you're looking for?
Sure. So look, I do AgriTech, agribusiness in India, which is obviously very different from France and from Europe in general, right? If I were to think about, if we were to talk about agriculture in France and agriculture in India, I think there are certain similarities. Both nations are very proud of their food traditions, and justifiably. Both are arguably two of the 4 or 5 best cuisines in the world. Okay, I am a diehard Francophile, so love French food. The difference is the farm size and the number of farmers. So India has 130 million farmers. With their families, that's about 600 million people, many times the population of France. The average farm size is 1 to 2 hectares, so much smaller than even what in France is considered to be a family farm. So if you ask me, okay, cool, what are the opportunities that we look at? I would describe 4 kind of themes that drive our investments. So one theme is basically this space of platforms, marketplaces, fintech, and digitization across this massive agricultural sector. So yes, India has 130 million farmers. That's relevant, but India is also a huge producer of almost every commodity in the world. It is the largest producer of cotton in the world. It's the largest producer of pulses. It's the largest producer of milk. And then it's number 2 in everything else. It's number 2 in rice and wheat and fruits and vegetables. It's like number 3 in tea, right? Number 1 in spices, which surprises nobody, okay? So it's a massive agricultural economy across a hyper-fragmented set of producers and millions of intermediaries. And so there's a real opportunity to use digital technologies to build layers of information, organization, trade, financing. So we do a lot in platforms, marketplaces, embedded fintech, and digitization. That's a huge theme of ours. A second theme of ours is the theme of deep tech. So there's a lot of stuff to do in terms of innovative hardware, whether it's sensors, drones, robots, satellites, automation. So, and a lot of that is climate-related deep tech. A third theme is what we call agri-food life sciences. So those tend to be very different startups. They tend to be founded by chemists and biochemists and biologists, either working on innovations in inputs or working on innovations in outputs, like innovative food. And then finally, we do a little bit at the intersection of agriculture and consumer, what we call farm-to-consumer brands, people that are trying to build food brands that source directly from farmers, where the agricultural value chain is the deciding characteristic of the company. So we would not just, back a CPG company making granola bars. Sure. But we do back one of the largest companies that is growing and processing nuts in India. Okay.
Yeah, so the ecosystem that you're talking about in India is pretty similar to the one that we have here at La Ferme Digitale, but in France.
Yeah. Listen, I mean, the other thing to remember is that India is the second largest agri-tech ecosystem in the world. Right, so AgriTech in India every year is about $1 billion of investment a year. Okay. So that's really taken off, and that may surprise your listeners. But I've been there through that journey, and it's been great. And India is the 3rd largest startup ecosystem across sectors in the world. So first is the US, second is China, third is India. So it's a very, very active ecosystem of venture capitalists, of startups, of technology.
Okay, wow. And I think you mentioned it in the panel earlier, but can you tell us a bit more about the availability of the funds at the moment? What do you see? What's the tendency?
So let me speak of the ecosystem as a whole, and then let me speak of Omnivore separately. So on the whole, right now, everyone has a very risk-off mentality. Okay, like a lot of people talk about risk on and risk off. There are times where the market is like actively looking for risk, and there are times where everyone's freaking out and panicking and nobody wants risk. Right now, things are very risk off, okay, because people really got ahead of themselves and overinvested at very high valuations in 2020 and 2021. And right now, everyone is worried about recession. They're worried about, asset bubbles deflating. So in general, growth capital is very, very tight right now. Growth, when I say growth capital, I mean what comes after venture.
Okay.
And because growth capital is so tight, people are being much more selective about venture capital investments because they know that growth capital availability, which needs to come in a few years later, is not there right now. So it's very hard to raise a Series A right now, and very, very hard to raise a Series B. For seed rounds, yeah, I would say it's a little harder than usual, but there is less of an impact there. It's also that the space of seed investing has been democratized. So yes, there are venture capital funds, but there are also accelerators and incubators and investor groups and angel networks and all sorts of new players besides traditional venture capital funds that do seed rounds. And those people are continuing to invest right now, even if everyone else is freaking out.
Okay.
So broadly, I would say if you're thinking about starting something new, you'll be fine. I think if you have raised a seed round, a year ago, you're probably seeing it's pretty hard out there to raise an A. And, those companies are cutting their burn, stretching their runway, and making it work. We there's a term we use, cockroaching, okay, right? Which means cockroaches can survive a nuclear blast. Okay, and they're just and so there's certain kinds of startups that are cockroach startups. I think a lot of startups are learning how to cockroach.
That's a very good metaphor. I like it. Well, as you explain, I can understand how the access to funding can be harder as the startups wants to grow. And as a VC, well, you can see that the development of this or that solution is highly conditioned by the access to funding. So therefore, you hold a great power on the future of agriculture. What's emerging today, and what do you want to catalyze at Omnivore?
I think the biggest thing that we're trying to catalyze in India right now is the agri-food life sciences ecosystem. India is a tremendous digital power, right? It's the largest number of software engineers in the world. It's very, very strong at everything digital, both hardware and software. It is not as strong in life sciences for a variety of reasons. Mostly talent. There are a lot of brilliant young people that study life sciences in India, and then they go do their graduate school abroad and stay abroad. And that was the case in the digital ecosystem 20 years ago. It's not the case anymore. Now the best and brightest talent stays in India or goes abroad and comes back. That is still the case in life sciences. And so one of our major preoccupations is catalyzing the life sciences ecosystem in India, the agri-food part of it. There's also obviously a healthcare part of it. But that's a major, major preoccupation of ours. And so backing new initiatives in agri-food life sciences is a huge priority. We have an initiative called Omnix Bio that you can read about on our website. But that's probably the biggest priority this year.
Okay. And, today you're in Paris, France. You were on a panel this morning in front of dozens of AgTech professionals, mostly from France or Europe, but also French startups. Is there a specific message that you wanted to communicate today?
Listen, I think that the entire AgriTech ecosystem is a very global one. I know most of the VCs that focus on AgriTech in Europe, whether it's folks at Astonor or Five Seasons, Capagro and the like, Yield Lab, Antera. We're very good friends with folks in Latin America who do this, with friends in North America who do this, with folks in China who do this. It's a very, very kind of nice, small global ecosystem of, I won't say everyone's best buds, but I would say there's a lot of collaboration. I think it's very interesting to see what's happening in European AgriTech, which is why I'm here today. And I think helping European AgriTech startups understand what's happening in Asia is useful for them. So I see it as a kind of cross-cultural ambassadorship.
Okay, awesome. Thanks a lot, Mark, for being with me today and taking time to share your views. J'espère que cet épisode vous a plu et qu'il aura éveillé votre curiosité sur l'innovation agricole au-delà des frontières. D'ailleurs, si vous avez aimé cet épisode, n'hésitez pas à en parler autour de vous, à le commenter ou à mettre 5 étoiles à ce podcast. C'est ce qui nous aide le plus à faire connaître FuturAgri. Cet épisode a été enregistré dans le studio du Grain de Contrôle, monté par Valentin Noton. Il est produit par la Ferme Digitale. Merci pour votre écoute et à bientôt pour un prochain épisode.